Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar by Core Recruitment. Thank you all very much for joining us today or watching the recording afterwards. Now, if there's one area at Core that we've seen massive amounts of growth in the past 3 to 4 years, it has been on the NED recruitment side of things, or the chairperson side of things. And a lot of this has been because companies have needed advice and support and guidance. I think a lot of companies have pivoted and changed direction. And also within organizations, longevity of kind of senior leadership, a lot of people are staying within companies for longer. So a lot of larger organizations and mid-sized organizations are actually encouraging their senior management team to go out and get NED roles so that they can bring fresh thinking, fresh ideas, and so on into their businesses as well. So we put together this webinar today with the idea to talk about NED recruitment as a whole, some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, how to best interview, how to best present yourself if you want to be a NED as well. And also, I guess, a little bit about the pound of flesh. So what's actually expected from you when you are a NED? What is the line? How involved do you kind of need to be, and how should that operate as well? So we've got a panel today of 4 proven NEDs who are going to be talking a little bit about their background and experience. We're going to do the webinar in 3 different parts today. So the first chunk is going to be a little introduction to the guys who are chatting today. The middle part of the webinar is going to be a little bit of a discussion about the various topics, and then we're going to finish up with some hints, tips, and suggestions for the future. Should be looking at a runtime of around about 45 minutes in total. So Liam, I'm going to come to you first. If you can give us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your experience, that would be great to get us kicked off.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Liam Black. I'm on the board of 3 companies. One is a mental health business called Togetherall.com, which is a global digital 24/7 platform for people with anxiety and depression. And I've been involved there for about 4 years. I'm also the chair of 2 companies in The Conduit, which is a global network of investors, social entrepreneurs, change makers of different sorts, based around a members club in Covent Garden. I've been doing that for about 2 years. Before that, I had my own company called Wavelength, which I was involved with for 10 years. I exited that, and I'm now in this phase of my life. Before that, I was CEO in the Jamie Oliver group. And then before that, I was involved in a whole range of different sort of purpose-led businesses here and overseas. Alongside my NED roles, I do some sort of paid advice and mentoring. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm playing with my grandchildren.
Excellent, Liam. That's brilliant. Thanks very much for joining us today. Much appreciated. Jim, come on to you next.
I'm Jim Waite. I run a small private equity firm called Waite Partners Capital, often known as WPC. We invest in healthcare and consumer healthcare, particularly as healthcare services, so hospitals, clinics, that kind of thing. And our consumer includes hospitality, which is how I've got to know Krishnan. We've been going for about a dozen years now. Prior to that, I spent many years as an operator. I know there are a lot of operators in the audience. Obviously through my day job, I spent a lot of time as an investor NED. But prior to my days in private equity, I also spent a lot of time in the FTSE 100 corporate world. So I've also some experience of NEDs in the very large end of things, more governance orientated. So I'm sure, hopefully, I can pass on some of that experience today.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you very much for being with us. Much appreciated. We'll come on to you next, Andy.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Andy Harris. Where to start? Probably with the 20 years that I spent at Compass Group, doing a variety of different roles for the UK business primarily. But I spent roughly 60% of my time in senior general management leadership roles and about 40% in business development leadership roles. So I was on the UK main board for Compass. Most latterly as the managing director for Restaurant Associates, which is their fine dining business, which was just the best job ever. Such a cool job, such a great business. Loved it. Then moved to ISS to lead their global business development team based in Copenhagen. And when that came to an end, coincidentally, actually, my first NED role was with a Danish, really cool, sexy food business called Logismose and Myers, who've got a business in 2 halves, one on retail, upmarket retail food, another one in food service. and had a great time, really interesting time as an ed with them, partly through the pandemic. And more recently, I'm just invested in my younger brother's people-centered business in agriculture. So I'm investing in there, and I'm going to be his non-exec chairman. And I do a few expert calls for, hilariously entitled expert calls for hedge funds and big consultancy firms as paid work too.
Excellent, Andy. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for being with us. Much appreciated.
Yeah,
Simon, we'll come on to you next.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Hi all, I'm Simon Wykes. So currently doing a few bits of bobs. I'm a non-exec of a hardware and software supplier of gaming solutions to the kind of broader leisure industry, predominantly UK focused. I'm also, I mean, though it's not technically an NED role, I act as an NED really in a startup that I've got involved in where I suppose, you know, if you were to try and define roles, you haven't got that far, probably more of an executive stroke non-executive chairman there. I also do consultancy, usually on some form of digitalization in operations. Prior to that, you know, my executive career spanned PLCs, private equity businesses and family-owned businesses, predominantly in the leisure and entertainment space, with a particular focus on gaming usually. So I was the CEO of Jackpot Joy, also of Gala Leisure, and I was the MD of Mecca Bingo in the Rank organisation, and also at Gala Cobble.
Excellent, Simon. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for being with us. Much appreciated. Now, Weiss, you missed the briefing, unfortunately. So, so we're just doing a little bit of a introduction to yourself and your background. If you can kick off with that for us, that would be brilliant.
No, sure. Apologies. As a tech man, of course, I had some slight tech issues. But no, probably just talking a little about me. Background, I came from quite a number of executive careers, so primarily at Just Eat. So continuing Andy's theme of Danish businesses. Not many people know Danish is Just Eat is a Danish food business. But I held a number of senior positions there, scaling operations, internationalizations, and strategy up until our IPO in 2014. I left Just Eat to join Treatwell, and again lead their international expansion, lead their operation, their scaling across 10 different geographies. For those of you that aren't familiar, Treatwell is Europe's largest marketplace for spas and salons. I left Treatwell and joined Push Doctor, which was the NHS's largest digital partner. We prioritized mainly telehealth, and we ultimately worked in partnership with NHS to provide digital solutions for over 6 million patients across the UK. I left Push Doctor last year. I hold a non-exec position at the Gym Group PLC. I also chair the sustainability committee at the Gym Group. I hold a board position at a French VC fund, which I can't go. Unfortunately, I'd love to announce it, but I'm not allowed to until they make the announcement. I'm also a governor at the Grange Academy. And I'm in that interesting place where I've transitioned from an executive career to a non-exec career. But you know what it's like at this phase. One or two people do call you and you get tempted sometimes. So, you know, for those of you out there, there may be some temptation for me to return for an executive career.
Thank you for the upsell, Weiss. That is really good of you. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Andy, because we were just a little bit off camera before we started recording, just a little bit about the process for when you're thinking about appointing an end. I guess what you can expect and what would bring that around from a company perspective. Andy, if you want to get us kicked off, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, sure. Look, I guess the principles of that, when you're looking to bring an ed in, are not dissimilar to any other senior role that you would look to take into your team. You know, if there was any skill at all in being a managing director, it was understanding what the business needed and putting the team of diverse talents together to hit all the areas of activity that you needed. That was really the only thing I was ever any good at. Unfortunately, that was probably what you needed to be good at in that MD role. And I think the same's true of the NED roles. And you know, with my sort of limited experience, I think you've got to start with a pretty honest appraisal of what you're trying to achieve. And I think some of the colleagues on the call tonight, this afternoon, would recognise that too, that you've really got to be clear whether you want a you want a supporting role, or whether you want the individual to make a more direct contribution. And I think both you as the company and the potential NED need to be clear about which of those it is, because some are to do with just making sure the business is doing the right thing in the right way, and others are where you've got a specific challenge. You know, perhaps that's growth, perhaps that's cost control, whatever it would be. And so matching, I guess, you as a client organization need and what kind of person are you looking for would be my top advice, my top advice for sure. And then from a NED point of view, what makes a good NED? I think certainly I found when I went from a senior leadership position into a NED role, it was interesting to be in the board room where you're so comfortable and so at home, but not be the one that's leading and directing. And that transition from leading and directing to timing your contribution to have the best impact for the team, and listening more for what that team needs than what you're interested in, and trying to match your little sweet spot of experience with whatever challenge they have. For those who haven't done an ed role yet, that's the hardest but most fulfilling transition you can make. It's very rewarding when you when you see that you're able to bring all those mistakes that you made and the little successes that you had and the experience that gives you to bear to help them perhaps get to a solution quicker than they would have if they'd have been searching around. Does that make sense for a starter?
It does definitely make sense for a starter, Andy. Thank you very much for that. I think the thing that we see a lot from the recruitment side of things is that people might not necessarily know what they want, but they know they want something. Liam, for you, I mean, you stepped in and out of lots of different organizations at lots of levels. And I guess kind of like, especially for a first time NED appointment from a company perspective, have you had to do a lot of coaching or guidance of kind of like, to help people through what they're actually looking for before you've gone in?
Yeah, very much so. I very much agree with what was just said there. I think some of it depends on the stage of life you're at. I mean, we've seen some of the younger NEDs that are involved in the companies that I'm involved with are doing it. Yes, they like the company, but it's very much part of their career development. It's important for them if they want to be a CEO or they want to develop to expand their network by getting some non-exec experience. Whereas for someone of my advanced years, I just want to do shit I'm interested in with interesting people. And so for me, it's a kind of end in itself, being a NED, rather than part of a strategy for my career. So as well as supporting what was just said there, I think from the seeker of a NED position, being very clear of what need it serves for you in your sort of career strategy, depending on where you're at. And then the other piece of advice I would give is when I'm interviewing NEDs is like, what is it that you can really bring to us? I tend to be involved in smaller organizations. I've never been involved in a massive PLC or a listed business. So in a smaller company, a NED can have maybe a disproportionate impact than they could have in Compass or Centrica or somewhere like that. So we take great care in the people that we allow in, because there's got to be a really, really good fit. And so really explaining to people what we want and the challenges of the business, because the worst thing that can happen to NED, if you go in with only one eye open and you go into your first meeting and find out, oh shit, we're running out of money in 2 months, are we? So doing due diligence is really, really, and it's obvious, but it's really, really important. And I think if the chair or whoever's inviting you in or interviewing you isn't showing you the downside as well and the challenging bits of the company, that would set alarm bells ringing for me. But my main bit of advice would be very clear about where you are in your career and what being a NED is serving for you.
Absolutely. And Liam, I mean, when dealing with, a lot of the individuals who are looking for NEDs are entrepreneurs, business founders. So their needs can obviously change on a daily or hourly basis. When you are kind of like looking at that kind of culture fit side of things, when you are looking at going in, what kind of questions should you be asking, and what should you be looking for?
What should be the person who's looking to be a NED be asking? Yeah, I think the point that Andy just made about the difference between exec and non-exec is really, really important. It's really, really important. It is very different to be sitting there watching the exec talk about them running the business And you might be thinking, "Shit, I wouldn't have done it like that, or I don't do it like that in the business I'm in at the moment." So I think you've got to accept that it is a different role that's to be played. But for me, it's always about clarity on both sides, what the company needs and what the person thinks they can give, and being very clear about what you're up for and not up for. So we have some brilliant non-execs who say pretty much, don't talk to me outside of the meetings. I'm giving you my time in the meeting and I'll be there. And then others like, whenever you want me, I'm there. I'll connect for you. I'll introduce you to people. So clarity so that the expectations on both sides are realistic and managed.
Having clear boundaries, that sounds like a very obvious but very important thing to do. I 100% agree. Simon, can you give us a little bit about your experience in this area?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of, just building on a couple of points that the guys have said already first. I mean, I would always start off, have a look at the balance sheet, understand who owns the company, and what their likely motives are, because that will have such a big impact on the organization. And whether you feel at home with it, whether it's PE, whether it's, you've got a lot of debt, whether it's owner manager, etc., has a big impact on how you feel. So I would start off with that. And the second bit that I would always add on is always be looking for what can you add to help the business rather than how can the business help you? Because if you look after the business, the rest follows. On my particular experience, I mean, it's quite interesting. I've worked with an owner manager in my primary NED role. Been with him for about 5 or 6 years. Very entrepreneurial, very innovative, very intuitive. I mean, he managed the business through the bank account effectively. He did everything. And his brief to me when he started was that he wanted to sell the business. And it didn't take very long to work out going, well, you can't sell the business unless you're prepared to stay because you are the business. And so therefore, going in as a non-exec there was actually, opening his eyes to what he should be looking at doing in terms of systems, processes, building a board, developing a team. And I think if you're getting involved in the owner manager side, you've actually got to be prepared to jump into the detail a bit yourself and help when there's there, because there's no one else there who can do that area. So you've got some skills, as opposed to, if I was on a PLC board, there's in a corporate, there's a big organization. You're never going to need to get into any detail there because there are people involved in running all of those various pieces. So I think that's, a big thing think about the scale of the business. How comfortable are you getting involved in stuff? How much do you want to stay away? Is it about governance? Is it about support? All of those are really key decisions to be making, and understanding whether you're looking to appoint an NED or whether you're looking for an NED role yourself.
So Simon, just staying with that in terms of the governance side of things, because this is something which kind of we also get asked a lot about, because it seems to almost feel a bit like if you are recruiting for a FTSE 250 company or an AIM listed business, etc., that you're probably doing a hell of a lot less work for a hell of a larger fee at that kind of level. So what are the responsibility levels involved, and what are the skill levels involved to kind of get you there with those appointments?
I mean, I think this is again all about where your background is. I mean, on the PLC board that I was on, I mean, the non-execs had quite a hell of a responsibility going through the audits and all of that supporting stuff. We're a heavily regulated business. So though the pay was good for them, the responsibilities were onerous. And clearly, if it goes wrong, that has an impact on everyone who's on the board. So I think if you're going into those roles, if your skill set is actually, I feel comfortable with all of that kind of stuff, that's great. So if you're looking at PLC, if you're more, I mean, I like to think I'm probably more less governance and more about people supporting, trying to open people's eyes to the bigger picture and all that. That's a very different skill set, and probably, clearly every board wants it, but I think that's less important in a PLC. You've got a stronger executive team for doing that, and it's more important in a smaller organization. So, but yeah, the governance, if you're going for a well-paid FTSE 250 role, expect there to be a hell of a lot of governance, and you're going to earn your money on the governance front, and you are going to be held accountable for that. So yeah, go in with eyes wide open.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Simon. I'm going to bring Jim in at this point to maybe talk about the different types of NEDs and the different types of kind of governance roles and et cetera that are kind of like out there. So Jim, if we can kick off with you on this one, that'd be great.
Actually, I just add something to what Simon said just now, and don't underestimate that as any kind of director, you take on some personal reliability, and in those listed type roles, you do take on personal reliability despite being, I would describe it as very non-executive. So a big organization, you're never going to get to know the way the people in the organization know it. And exactly as Simon says, if you're comfortable with that, then great. But I certainly know people who've had nasty surprises. And if you think about, if without naming names, if you Google for large listed companies that have got into difficulties, and each one of those came with half a dozen non-executives that, suddenly found themselves in some shape or form personally responsible for what had happened, and at best they ended up with a lot of life inexperience. I know someone who whose business got into crisis. They said to the lawyers, "I need to resign because I don't have the time to deal with this crisis," and that person didn't leave the room that they were in for the next 2 weeks, other than to go to a hotel and sleep, and and they were pretty embroiled in it for a full year. So it doesn't happen very often, but it is it is a significant risk. But to answer your question, Christian, we make use of people that you might call non-executives in various ways, and probably the three main buckets is we do take on some people who are a little like I was describing my role on our boards, genuinely not non-executive, or genuine NEDs. And I'd maybe talk a bit afterwards, if you'd like me to, Christian, about what that typically involves in the private equity world. But for those of you looking to sort of broaden experience or looking to enter a phase of life where you're more of a plural kind of person, there are other options. And Liam mentioned consulting. Obviously, that can take up a part of your time, and Andy mentioned expert panels. They can be very lucrative on a per hour rate, although the work tends to be somewhat infrequent. But another couple, we make use of specialist advisors. So we've got a very experienced HR person that we use to provide very senior level HR to all of our investments. Companies that on their own wouldn't be able to afford that level of advice. And for us, working with the same person over and over means there's a consistency to our approach. And obviously, he's someone we like, so we like the approach we've developed to get together. And we have someone similar who works on all of our property development. So there's NEDs, the specialist sort of repeat advisors, and then there are sort of non-board boards as well. So we are currently setting up a clinical governance committee for one of our healthcare businesses that will be staffed with people who are sort of like non-execs, but strictly speaking, they're not non-executive directors. And other businesses have advisory boards, which may not be directors, and there are other sort of groups like that, which you may decide are more your thing.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. Just in terms of kind of time commitment, what are you kind of looking at for these kind of various stages? If you're brave enough to talk about remuneration on camera, that would be amazing, but I won't hold it against you if not.
Remuneration in the private, let me start with that one, because that's probably, I think a good chunk of the audience will have forgotten the first half of that question once you said remuneration. in the private equity world, typically for private equity, it tends to be lower on fixed than it might be, say, in the listed world, more on variable. And the variable part varies enormously, I would say, and varies a lot by size of business. I personally am not an advocate of always chase larger businesses because they pay more. Do what you enjoy, do what you do well, and you'll find that in the long term that works out better. And I can see some nods of approval from my fellow panelists there. But you know, if so it's certainly the case that in a successful private equity deal where the chief executive is picking up millions on exit, then the chairman might be picking up $1 million at the same time. It's those, a 5-to-1 ratio or something like that is not atypical. For the month-to-month remuneration, think of a day rate. Typical sort of time involved in private equity is probably a bit higher than it is in the listed world. So, think a couple of days a month, which might be half a day of a board meeting, a few hours of prep, and another day spread here and there on other things. Think about what your day rate would be, and two days you get paid 2 days a month of that day rate on a regular basis.
Sounds quite straightforward. Simon, we'll bring you in at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the time commitment is actually a really interesting point, because in my experience so far of non-exec, it's very, very variable. There are little points when actually, I probably, speak to the CEO, every week, but for maybe, half an hour. But, there'll be times when I could spend 3 days a week on the business. There'll be another time where I might only spend, a day, a quarter. It's all very, very dependent on the business. And I think, unless you're in a very structured PLC role, I would go in with the open eyes that you may need to flex and do a fair bit of work at certain points when the organization needs it. So don't do it if you're already completely rammed and just try and chuck it on top. That's probably a way not to do yourself a good service or the business.
Excellent, thanks for that. We'll bring in Weiss at this point as well. Weiss?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on the points that Jim and Simon have made, I think, it's somewhat standardized for me. And again, in my experience and all the interviews that I've been involved, it's somewhat standardized in the listed world, and it's probably a bit less flexible. But I do find certainly in the PE world and the VC world, depending on stage of company and what they're trying to do, whether it be at seed, Series A, B, C, pre-acquisition, IPO, etc., they tend to be a bit more flexible. They tend to also, at times, being completely transparent, a bit more lucrative as well. And because those types of companies also are somewhat ad hoc, I mean, they can say to you, look, we'd love for you to do 2 days a month and we'll pay you X and we'll give you Y shares. I think it's also clear sometimes you kind of go to 3, 4, 5 days. And once you do that, it is quite easy to go back to the table and say, hey, look, I'm now spending 4, 5, 6 days. Let's look at this. Where I think in the PLC world, where it's a bit less, flexible, it's you generally can't. And again, in my experience, you can't be as, when it comes to remuneration, when it comes to salary, you can't be as flexible.
Thank you for that. We'll bring in Liam at this point as well. Liam?
Yeah, I think the point about what the time commitment is I think is very linked to the stage that you're at. So I like getting involved in fairly early stage businesses that are doing things that I'm interested in, because I've got time on my hands to be involved. If I was still a CEO with Jamie or running my own company, though, I had much less time, and so the choices I would have made would have been different. So I think all of these things are connected, and I would really support the point that was made about don't just do it for the money, do it for it sits with you in terms of your purpose and what you want in life. And I think if you enter into it with that kind of integrity, then the money will take care of itself over time. That's been my experience, and the experience of the really good NEDs and fellow directors that I have worked with and am working with.
Andy will bring you back in now as well.
Yeah, look, just an extra point on top, really. I mean, I guess keep an open mind. I mean, my whole career was spent in the corporate world in big, ugly, beautifully formed PLCs, and the FirstNet role was a much smaller business, but it felt instantly familiar. Not least because the sector, you could add some value, but the structure of how everything worked, as you say, the exec team were well formed and chosen, and you were just supporting, and you were the person that could perhaps see the haze and fog of day-to-day running the business, and perhaps sit above it and lift them out of that occasionally to see the strategic direction. So that was great. But the revelation for me was helping a much smaller business that was so far from corporate you couldn't believe. And the thrill, and it happened to be my brother's business, of helping him get ready to grow, treble the size of his business, by bringing some of the disciplines. And anybody that knows me, there's one or two on the call, I think, that would chuckle at the word discipline being associated with me. But to bring the ability to see a strategic direction, and then the structure that the business needed to have in place the right controls and the right step plan and the quarter review process. It's transformed, the launch pad for that business. So I guess my point, Christian, would be, don't just go play in the area where you have the most experience, because I certainly found you can bring that to life in a very different environment, and that took me a bit by surprise.
Excellent. I think Liam wants to chip in something
Yeah, just
else.
a very small point. On the board of the Conduit, we have a guy who's the founder and now exec chairman of a listed company, and his company's this size, we're this size, but he brings so much knowledge, and he's really good at on the finances and on the governance side of things, because he's from a regulated, he breathes and eats it, and that is really, really helpful. But what he doesn't do, which I suspect you don't do either, Andy, is allow that experience to kind of suffocate innovation and risk taking and entrepreneurialism. So yeah, I really agree with your point that you can really add value in a world that's very different from your own, even though you might not at the beginning think that you can.
Yeah.
Excellent. We're going to come back onto Wise now just for a second, and I wanted to focus a little bit on the interview process in terms of what you go through when you're actually meeting potential people you want to partner with, what you should be looking for, what stages of process you should be going through as well. Is it quite different to a normal exec recruitment process? Wise, on to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and probably the best example I'd use is during my my time at Push Doctor. I mean, we were historically a direct-to-consumer private business, and then we pivoted the business to partner with the NHS. And upon that pivot, that's when we decided that we needed some non-execs to help. And I think it wouldn't surprise many people on the call that the NHS is typically it's a closed group traditionally, and you usually need somebody to help get you in. So when we were building our advisory board, we kind of set a group of non-execs. We set 2 or 3 key criteria. We said they need to have A, B, and C for them to be successful within that. Now, in terms of the recruiting, I'd probably say for us, it wasn't as intense as it would have been for an exec. Now, for an exec, my typical process would be I do the interview, the team would do the interview, the chair would do an interview, an investor would do the interview, and we made them spend 1 or 2 days within the office to get to know the team. It was a lot more rigorous in a typical exec recruitment. But for a non-exec, once it went through me and other board members, it was a bit more faster, so long as, I'm one of those who, whenever I wanted to bring a non-exec in, I wanted the business, one, to get the value we needed from it, but secondly, to give that non-exec purpose. There are some businesses, and I'm not here to criticize it, there are some businesses that just hire people because of their name, because of their logo, because of the businesses they've been with, and that is their prerogative. But for me, when I wanted somebody in, I wanted somebody who could help me with 2 or 3 areas. And I wasn't shy, and I'm seeing some of the newer non-execs, and during my interview process, I found some of the less seasoned execs respond better to my style than the seasoned execs. So for example, if I went to somebody who'd been a non-exec for 20, 30 years, particularly the NHS, and I said, well, you have 3 KPIs to help Push Doctor, they were very much like, excuse me, it was very much, or actually, those who had been execs for less than 10 years, less than 5 years were quite responsive to that. And they were very, great, I've got a purpose, I know what I'm going to need to work on, etc. So I think probably coming to your question, Christian, I think for me, the process is a little bit lighter, but for me, all processes should be how can you add value and what are the core areas you should focus on and how do we support each other in that?
Excellent. Jim, we'll come to you next.
So for sort of what you might call regular recruitment, I don't really have anything to add to what Wise has just said, but and sometimes we use that process. A process we quite like, which is different, and so and probably won't be overly obvious until you get to the end of it, is we spend some time networking with people, just meeting people through the usual processes of networking. If someone seems to click with us or seems like someone who might know or be able to add value to one of our current businesses or future businesses, we'll try and find a way of getting them to do some consulting with us, which will probably genuinely be a project, but there'll be two agendas. One is the project, the second is get to know the person. And through that process of 1, 2, 3 pieces of consulting, then maybe at the end of that is where we might find an opportunity for the person to do some kind of non-executive role. My advice to those who approach to do that kind of thing by private equity firms is don't do much of it for free. When I was on the other side of the fence, I developed a firm rule that I do a few hours, maybe a day, but after that, the clock was running. And I'd encourage all of you to adopt a similar process, because everyone's open to free help, aren't they? Anything that's because in the private world, you're not governed by governance processes that insist on a particular way of you ending up in a job, preferred candidates and that and panels of candidates and picking a preferred one. That kind of gradual get to know can be quite powerful for us. So I'd encourage you to follow it if you think that's what's happening.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Jim. I apologise if there's any background noise. There's this really irritating woman who follows me around London, drinking white wine and speaking very loudly every single time I try and do a webinar away from my office. And she's just arrived at Ham Yard, so I had to move. But Liam, I'm going to come back to you. And the question I wanted to ask was about longevity. So should there be a timeline in terms of like how long you should spend as a NED within a certain company? Is there kind of like a certain element of keeping it fresh that you should be doing?
Yeah, well, with the conduit, I've been putting together two boards over the last year, and we have got time limits on each of them. It can be renewed, but I think it's important to both for the NED and for the company to know that there is an opportunity to refresh, and that you're not just stuck with someone and you're getting involved in a horrible, getting them out the door when they don't want to go, sort of thing. So I think having a time limit. And or being very open when you go in about what is the time limit that you are prepared to give. But you must remember that if you are a non-exec director, you have fiduciary responsibility, whichever sector you're in, and so that must be taken very seriously. But I am all for that, also for probationary periods before people sign up, just to see what they're really like. It's one thing to meet someone in for a cup of coffee in in Dishoom, and then have them turn up in the room and they're a bit different. So I think it's like all relationships, isn't it? You've got to go into it mindfully. You've got to, have a bit of a prenup in there in a sense of ways in which that if it doesn't work out for either side, it can be managed. But I am definitely one for time limits.
Excellent. And Andy, you wanted to chip in?
Yeah, I did. It was just to support that, really. I guess the word click, do they click with us, was used, and I think if Compass benefited from anything, it was the realization that they had that there was a science to that. So exec function recruitment and NED should all understand the personality types of the of the different people that are working together. You know, that's part of how you put a good board together, isn't it? And I think the risk, if it's an ed job and it's not given that same kind of scientific approach, things can go wrong. So, you know, put simply, you have, if you're going to help an organization, you have to be able to click with you know, with the CEO and CFO, especially, and the chairman and the chairperson, and that should really be looked at the point of recruitment. So that should be intentional, not accidental. Whether it's in Dishoom or anywhere else, I think is my point.
Easier if it's Dishoom, right?
Yeah.
Simon, on to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add on to that that length of time period, really, and you know, maybe it was a unique, but when I got involved in my role, obviously I was the first, well, and I still am the only non-exec getting involved, and obviously, you know, when it's an owner manager who's watching the cost carefully, it's always worry about that. And when we started the relationship, I mean, we didn't do a contract for 12 months. So we just started working and just said, right, well, if you don't think I'm adding any value, then move me on. It's not like it's an executive role where, you know, I've got a mortgage to pay and I need that cash to drive all of that thing. Now, most people in a non-exec are in a slightly different position. So, you know, I completely agree with the don't offer yourself up for free for too long, because obviously someone will always take the mickey out of you. But I would be a bit bold in going in and going, well, let's see how it works. And, you know, the same as a probationary. If it doesn't work for either party, let's have it very easy for us to go our separate ways at the start, and just make sure everyone feels comfortable with it.
Absolutely. Now, Wise, coming back onto you, and I guess from a career development perspective, because the profile of NEDs is somewhat changing from, you know, to people who are kind of like very much mid-career. You mentioned at the start you're still interested in exec appointments yourself. So from a career development perspective, what do you get out of doing these governance roles, these NED roles? What does it add to your portfolio?
I mean, for me, from a personal perspective, it just strengthens, brings more strings to my bow. I think, you know, when I you know, my first non-exec position was at the Gym Group. It was listed. Look, I knew some stuff about a listed company. We had just gone through that at Just Eat. But, you know, when I was told that I would initially be part of the remuneration committee, the audit committee, the nominations committee, and also a non-exec, I think the thing that the Gym Group did extremely well, which is something that I want to make sure happens in all the other places, was, you know, first of all, I will explain this to you. However, during your induction, you will sit down with all of our advisors, all of our teams, and they will help you understand the responsibilities of being as part of the audit committee, of being part of nominations and REMCOM. And following that, then you could, you know, then you can make, you know, we can have that discussion on whether or not it makes you feel uncomfortable or not. And, you know, going through that for me from a personal perspective was massive, because the other two boards that I'm on right now, I'm a lot more, but it helps me a lot more. But seeing all the companies, in one of the companies that I'm a non-exec on, you know, we have a portfolio, we have numerous different businesses who are going through acquisition, IPO, and getting from me where I typically like to play is I like to play in the Series A to IPO. I love that part. Following IPO, I enjoy that too. But where I like to play is that area, and getting the people I advise on or other CEOs to say, okay, when you're starting now to become a listed company, this is what you need to think about. This is the type of governance that comes part of it. These are the kind of committees you're going to have to get introduced. I think that certainly has been extremely beneficial. And just from a personal perspective, you know, it's, you know, since the Gym Group and the other groups that I've been on, you know, when I do interview for others, you know, I don't have to blag it anymore. I don't have to wing it. I can talk about it. I can have that conversation. And whether or not you choose to go, I mean, I think what the guy said beforehand, you know, if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. And for me, you know, being able to be part of something, understanding it now a lot more, and then being able to be in that position to say, I'm no longer that person who says, well, actually, it would just be good for my experience and just a good part of my profile if I just have this now. Now I kind of have it, you know. And I always feel the first non-exec position is the important one, because, you know, like every single career, the first time you're a manager, the first time you're a CEO, the first time you're an exec, you know, that first one, there is some compromise, but then following that, you can be a bit more flexible. And I just think that first time, you know, I was quite fortunate with the Gym Group, and Penny, who's the chair, is an absolute brilliant woman. I was quite fortunate with that. And now I'm at that point where I can be a bit more flexible, and I can be, you know, I can focus more on choice. And, you know, some people are strong from the beginning. Some people right at the beginning say, do you know what, this isn't for me, I'm not there. But sometimes you do have to do things which you don't enjoy to come to a level to get to that. And both routes are the right routes, and it's just ultimately what you can take.
Excellent. Get your first non-exec out of the way, and then lay down the law in the second is what is the vibe I'm getting. An excellent,
Something like that.
It's an excellent suggestion. Now, Graham came back and he said he would like to tease out the point about skill set and competencies being valuable in other businesses. Who'd like to pick that one up?
Well, shall I have a bash?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so I guess we were in the lucky position with the Conduit in being able to cast 2 new boards. We could be very specific about what we wanted. So we clearly wanted someone, with big hospitality experience. We wanted someone with, sort of fiduciary due diligence, etc. And so we were very specific about the sorts of putting together a cast of directors where they would, be able to participate very well on particular things. And then we've got on to create, subgroups around food and beverage, finance and audit, obviously, and for us, ethics and impact. And so all of the people, we were very specific when we were looking for people. So, for example, we've got someone very senior from Nando's who sits on our board. He's used to a massive company, and he also works for the investment company that own that business. And we're a tiny little company compared to that. But his knowledge, his expertise fits very well with us. But I think equally importantly to your skill set, and I think everyone has said it, is your personality and your ability to understand, particularly if you come from, and Jivan is fantastic at this, coming from a large organization, to be able to have the patience to know that actually in a smaller organization, we don't have the systems in the backup that a Nando's or a Dishoom or a Soho House might have. So occupying that space of using your experience from a larger organization in a smaller growing learning one, I think is what makes it very interesting for all of us, but might not be for everyone. So, but I'm, as I said, big fan of people coming from very different worlds and different sizes of organizations into smaller or bigger ones.
Excellent. I'll add in Andy at this point.
Look, I think you made the point perfectly well. That's exactly what I was going to say. So I think that was my big realization that, number one, if you've had a big corporate career, actually the stuff you pick up by osmosis and that becomes just part of how you work is incredibly valuable potentially to smaller businesses. And I perhaps, looking back now, think in the corporate world, perhaps we should have had an ability to engage with more entrepreneurial people that could have, come in and refreshed. So I think it works both ways.
Yeah.
So one, don't underestimate what you've assimilated without barely knowing it, and how valuable that can be for a business that's setting up to grow. And be open-minded if you're a big business to bring in somebody that doesn't fit your corporate. Perhaps that's an intentional move to bring in somebody who has grown a small business and can help a bigger business find its feet ready to grow more.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Andy. Now we're going to move into the final part of our webinar, which is about hints, tips, suggestions, any pitfalls. I think we've uncovered a few already, the balance sheet being a core one of them. So Andy, any final comments from your side of things?
I think we've said it often, and the key thing is to make sure you fit with the business, both as a person, with the individual to individual, and you feel you can bring something that will help what it is that they're trying to achieve. And if they're not clear with you, when I met the chairman of the business that I joined, he was really clear about what they wanted to do. We decided together that there were some things that I could help them with, and it was a good fit. I think if they're not able to articulate to you, these are the outcomes that we want, and do you feel you can help us? That would be my very top tip. Only take a step in if you're clear that you understand what they're trying to achieve and you can help.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Andy, and thanks very much for being with us. Much appreciated.
You're
Jim,
welcome.
come on to you next.
The one thing we haven't talked about that's probably worth a minute is a very common form of non-exec in the private equity world is what I would call a bridge non-exec. So prior to the last 12 years, I spent 10 years working with various private equity firms on various things. Most of the private equity world are still generalist investors. So if they're investing in your digital education business, it'll be the first time they've invested in something education, and maybe the first time they've invested in something digital. And most of this audience know that whatever industry you're in, when numbers, your weekly, monthly numbers do whatever they do, sometimes it's a normal variance week to week. Sometimes it's out of the ordinary, and that kind of thing that almost is intuitive to someone who knows an industry well, the private equity investor probably won't know. So there's a very common role, which I call almost a bridge between the private equity investors who've got one set of knowledge, one set of skills, one set of familiarity, but aren't overly familiar with the business. And particularly in the case of first-time teams or fairly inexperienced teams working for private equity, they don't really understand where the private equity investors are coming from. And so particularly, and I'm sure there are some of these in the audience, people who've done 2 or 3 private equity back deals and are now thinking of doing something plural, they will have the right experience by now to be able to play those kind of bridge roles. And three deals in, you'll probably find it surprisingly easy, but it will add a lot of value on both sides of the fence.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for being part of today. Much appreciated. Simon, we'll come on to you next.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like stating the obvious, but I think the most important thing is to actually identify what are you really good at and what is it that you really enjoy doing, so that you make sure that you match what you're really good at with the right organization and the right role. And it sounds obvious, but people get, I think, a bit too attracted of it's a sector I've got experience in or anything else, rather than the, one of the personal characteristics that I have, rather than a very narrow experience. Because I think in a non-exec role, sometimes it's even better to have had no direct experience there, because you just come with a different mindset. And then the final bit that I would add is, is it this a business that you really want to get involved in? I mean, and people can do it. Does the context of your involvement in the organization going to really just evolve around getting a big board pack and reading that and adding to that? Or do you have a desire to get further in? And if actually, the organization that you're looking for wants what you're really good at and what you enjoy doing, and it's an organization that you really want to spend some discretionary time off the meter getting to understand it so that you can work out where you can best add value, then it's a good role for you. And if you're an organization looking for an ED, I'd be looking for those 2 characteristics. What is the one thing that I really want? And how does the applicant have that? And are they going to be prepared to get involved in this organization and do a bit more than just the limited amount that you can do and get away with as a non-exec?
Very good advice, Simon. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for being part of today. Much appreciated. Wise, we'll come on to you next.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing for me is, once you've established, how you would add value and what board members and the chair, etc., want from you, it is quite intimidating going in there. You're the new person on the block. Everybody knows it's each other, pre-established relationships. The one piece of advice I'd give is you've been hired for a reason. Don't forget that. Like, please do not stay quiet in a room. I mean, I really get excited about the NHS world and the EdTech world. These traditional public sectors. The school that I'm a governor on, I sat in one of the classes and I listened to a few things. And, if I could play it all over again at 14, 15, yes, A squared plus B squared equals C squared is important. However, learning real life stories, real life experiences, things such as getting a mortgage, or this is how you interview for a job, etc. Just a newer, fresher way of thinking. I was just surprised that the classroom that I had 20 or so years ago when I was in school is exactly what it is right now. And I just think, when I'd seen that, for me, it's just a case of, look, I mean, come on, we've got to change the status quo. Now, if I'm being honest, 50% of that room was a bit, and the other 50% was excited about what I do. But I think that's the whole point of a board. The whole point of a board is to bring diversity, to bring different voices. And if you're being quiet or you're a bit shy, then ultimately the board is not getting the best of white recruiters do, and you're not getting the best out of yourself. So on top of what everybody has said, I think the key thing I would add is, please, you've been hired for a reason. Please make yourself vocal, because that's extremely important.
Really good advice. Thank you very much for that, Wise, and thanks for being with us. Much appreciated. And Liam, coming to you last.
I just had a horrible flashback to my school days of being beaten up by Christian brothers. So thanks for that. Thank God that has changed. I think the advice, I can't really add anything to the advice given. I would just say, for me, one of the reasons I do it is for fun and intellectual engagement in worlds that, you know, challenge me and introduce me to people who are doing brilliant stuff, and I like being around. I think that's really important. And so, yeah, so I would just say, into the mix of things that you think, well, should I do this company or not? Will it be fun? Will you be engaged? And will it really add something to your life, as well as maybe a bit of cash and a bit of cachet on the CV?
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Liam, and thank you very much for taking part today as well. Well, I think that was a really interesting session, and I think we covered a lot of ground, and I have yet another new background from having the same one for 2 years. I've now done 2 in a webinar. Impressed with myself. We have a webinar coming up on Friday morning, which is going to be looking at hospitality tech, and it's featuring a really cool app called Yapster, which lots of people have been using through the pandemic. And we have Rob, their founder, who's going to be joining us to tell us a little bit about Yapster, and also a little bit about the changing face of hospitality technology as well. And then the week after next, on the 11th, we have a recruitment special, which is going to be looking at recruitment challenges. And we've got some brilliant companies that are going to be on telling us a little bit about some of the techniques that they're using to attract and retain their best people. Just leaves me to say thank you very much to everybody for taking part today, guys. Much, much, much appreciated. And we'll hopefully see you all very soon. Bye now.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks all.